Lionel Messi is exactly what Galileo warned us about 400 years ago. It sounds like a ridiculous comparison, but hear me out. It's the 2015 Copa del Rey final, Barcelona versus Athletic Club. It's the 19th minute of the match, and the score is 0-0. Messi receives the ball far away from goal in the right-hand side of the pitch. He's literally at the halfway line, nowhere near the goal, and has the entire Athletic Club players surrounding him. According to every traditional defensive principle that football had spent over a century building itself around, this is where attacks are supposed to die. Instead, Messi accelerates, beats one defender, 2, 3, cuts onto his left foot, and blasts it into the near post. Golazo.
Well, there's three of them, Riley. Still going. Look at this, Kevin. It's a brilliant run from Messi. Will he go all the way? It's one of the great Copa del Rey final goals from the magical, mercurial Lionel Messi.
In that moment, something much larger than a football match was happening. We were watching a structural collapse of everything football believed it understood about space, athleticism, physicality, and what a human being could realistically do on a football pitch. So how does this relate to Galileo? Well, in 1632, he published a book that changed humanity's understanding of reality forever. The book was called Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, and its argument was quite simple. Galileo stated that the universe does not work the way you think it does. For nearly 2,000 years, educated men had constructed entire systems of knowledge around assumptions they still believed were undeniable truths. Stuff like the heavier object falls faster, that the earth stood still, that inherited wisdom was more trustworthy than observation itself. Galileo challenged all of it. He attacked the framework people used to interpret reality. He insisted that observation mattered more than assumption, that evidence mattered more than tradition, that if the results contradicted the acceptable models, then the model itself might be wrong. The establishment condemned him for this, because what Galileo was really warning the world about went beyond just astronomy or physics. It was what happens when a single person exposes that the limitations society believed were natural laws were never actually laws at all. Messi did the exact same thing. He exposed the limitations that society believed about football. To understand why Messi changed football forever, you first have to understand the football world that he walked into. By the early 2000s, football already had a very clear idea of what greatness was supposed to look like. The best players were usually powerful athletes, tall strikers, explosive wingers, dominant midfielders who could physically control games. Football believed that size, speed, and strength were necessary if you wanted to truly dominate at the highest level. Small players could still be exciting. They could dribble, they could entertain the fans, but they weren't usually viewed as players you could build an entire era around, especially not from the center of the pitch. The middle of the pitch was considered the most dangerous area in football. There was less space, more defenders, more tackles, and generally less time to think. Coaches taught players to move the ball quickly before pressure arrived. The tighter the space became, the harder football was supposed to get. Football believed that efficiency decreased when congestion increased. Messi would eventually prove the exact opposite, because somehow the less space Messi had, the more dangerous he became. And that idea completely broke football's understanding of the game. What makes this even more interesting is that Messi never looked like the type of player football usually trusted. As a kid, scouts constantly worried about his body. He was small, physically fragile, and dealing with growth hormone issues. There were real concerns about whether he could even survive the physical demands of elite football. A lot of people saw him as a talented luxury player, someone technical, someone creative, but not someone who could completely control the sport itself. Football had already built its understanding of greatness around physical supremacy, and Messi was the complete opposite of that model. I mean, as a kid, if he turned sideways, he would disappear. That's how skinny he was. But this is where the Galileo comparisons start becoming really important, because Galileo also walked into a world that already believed it understood how reality worked. For nearly 2,000 years, everyone from scientists to philosophers trusted the same assumptions about physics, motion, and the universe itself. The accepted model already felt complete. It felt stable, proven. Then Galileo arrived and started producing results that the model couldn't explain, which is exactly what happened to Messi. Small players were not supposed to dominate the most crowded areas of the pitch. They weren't supposed to control entire games against elite defenders. The model already had rules for what should could and shouldn't be possible. Messi kept violating those rules anyway. And just like Galileo, the problem wasn't that Messi was slightly different, because back then they still had dribblers. They still had good players. The problem was that Messi's existence hinted that football's accepted understanding of the sport might have hidden flaws that nobody fully recognized yet. And over time, people slowly realized that they might have discovered something football's framework couldn't fully explain. They were looking at a player that wasn't supposed to exist. By the 2010s, Messi was already viewed as the most talented player in the world. But talent wasn't the problem that football was about to face. The real problem was that under Pep Guardiola, Messi stopped looking like an incredible player and started looking like an alien that was a contradiction to the sport itself. Pep's Barca created the perfect environment to test the limits of football's entire tactical framework. Let's call it the Messi experiment. And the results of that completely broke the model. The biggest change came in 2009 when Pep started using Messi as a false nine. At the time, strikers were still expected to behave like traditional forwards. Stay high up the pitch, occupy the center backs, finish chances inside the box. You know, basically the opposite of what we see from Liam Delap. Football had already built decades of tactical understanding around those assumptions. But Messi kept breaking them. He started dropping deeper into the midfield, pulling defenders into spaces they weren't supposed to follow him into. And suddenly, football's defensive rules just stopped making sense. If the center back stayed deep, Messi had space to turn and drive directly through the middle of the pitch. If the center back followed him forward, space opened up behind for players like Pedro and David Villa to attack. The defenders were making what was considered the correct decision at the time based on football's accepted logic, but the structure itself had become unstable.
We'd played against him before and we'd locked him down, but this was a different Messi. This was Messi who had more freedom to run around and be central. Whereas before he was really stuck wide, so you could pin him down a bit. Still great, but when he was allowed that freedom to be able to move and pop up anywhere and surprise you, it's like unplayable, like ridiculous. And he was actually better at Wembley. I remember standing on the pitch of Scholesy and watching them go and lift a trophy and just going, we just need to get off there because they took our soul. And Messi was the main ingredient.
That's what made Messi different. He not only beat defenders, but he was exposing football's defensive system, a system that had been built around assumptions that all stopped applying when Messi touched the ball. And this is again where the Galileo parallels become impossible to ignore. Not only did Galileo prove that previous scientists were wrong about a few details, he revealed that their entire framework, the one they used to understand reality, was incomplete. So the problem wasn't just one bad calculation, the problem was the model itself. Messi was doing the same thing just in football. Midfielders couldn't track him because he moved like a forward. Defenders couldn't track him because he operated like a midfielder. Pressing structures collapsed because Barcelona overloaded the center of the pitch with movement and passing angles, things that football at the time wasn't designed to handle. The closer teams tried to get to Messi, the more dangerous Barcelona became. That completely contradicted football's accepted understanding of space. For decades, football believed congestion reduced attacking possibilities. Tight spaces were supposed to limit creativity, but Messi turned crowded central areas into the most dangerous zone on the pitch. Somehow, the less room he had, the more control he seemed to gain over the game. It was football's version of Galileo dropping objects from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The establishments believed one thing, but reality kept producing another result. The 2011 Champions League final against Manchester United became the perfect example of this paradigm collapse. United were one of the best teams in the world. They were the champions of England. They were organized, disciplined, and had so much experience. I mean, they were being managed by Sir Alex Ferguson, and he was applying the same defensive principles that elite football had trusted for decades, yet none of it worked. Messi kept appearing in spaces where he wasn't supposed to dominate. Barcelona kept creating overloads that stretched United's shape until the entire defensive structure started breaking apart. The game looked less like a football match and more like a scientific experiment, exposing the flaws in football's understanding of positioning and control. Galileo once wrote that the greatest obstacle to knowledge isn't ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. Football thought it understood how space worked. Messi revealed that the sport's entire understanding of space had hidden limitations that nobody had fully recognized until he arrived. That's why Pep's Barcelona were so shocking at the time. Not only were these guys dominating, but they were exposing structural contradictions inside football's tactical framework in real time. And once the experiment succeeded, the rest of football had no choice but to react. Suddenly, teams everywhere were trying to copy Barcelona. False nines became more trendy. Positional play spread across Europe. The scary thing about Messi was that once he started dominating the sport, football had two choices. Either admit that the small, physically fragile player had discovered a completely different way to control football, or keep trying to explain why what he was doing somehow didn't fully count. For years, a huge part of the football world chose that second option. People said he was just a Barcelona system player. They said he only worked because of Xavi, Iniesta, and Pep. They said he couldn't do it in more physical leagues, that he walked too much, that he wasn't athletic enough, that he wouldn't survive in older eras of football. Then when he dominated Spain, people moved the goalposts again. Oh, well, he can't do it internationally. Even after winning everything with Argentina, the criticism kept coming because football still struggled to fully process what Messi represented. And this is exactly where the Galileo comparisons become important again. When Galileo challenged the accepted understanding of physics and astronomy, the establishment didn't simply disagree with him because they hated him personally. They resisted him because accepting Galileo meant admitting that centuries of accepted wisdom had been built on flawed assumptions. That's what Messi did to football. Because if Messi truly was the greatest player the sport had ever seen, then football had to rethink a lot of things it believed were fundamental truths. Maybe physical dominance wasn't the highest form of control anymore. Maybe the center of the pitch wasn't too crowded for small players to dominate. Maybe, just maybe, intelligence, balance, spatial awareness, and technical precision could overpower physicality at the very highest level of the sport. That idea made a lot of traditional football culture uncomfortable, especially for the people who are in love with the Premier League. That's why so much of the criticism around Messi always sounded so repetitive. Oh, can he do it on a cold, rainy night in Stoke? He wouldn't survive in the Premier League. He only works in Barcelona's system. People kept trying to explain Messi away because fully accepting him meant acknowledging that the sport itself had misunderstood certain things for generations. And the funny part throughout all of this was that the observable reality kept contradicting the criticism. The numbers kept getting more ridiculous. The consistency became impossible to deny. Season after season, Messi dominated games, scoring against Premier League teams, doing it outside of Barca's system with Argentina, winning even without Xavi, Iniesta, and Pep Guardiola. The more evidence appeared, the more uncomfortable the old framework became. Galileo once wrote that people became deeply attached to the systems they use to explain reality, even when reality itself starts proving those systems incomplete. That's exactly what happened with Lionel Messi. The most important part of Messi's story is that football eventually started changing itself around him. That's how you know a player has become something bigger than greatness. The sport itself begins adapting to what they reveal. Before Messi, football was still built around fairly rigid positional structures. Wingers stayed wide, strikers stayed high up the pitch, midfielders created chances, forwards finished them. This is assuming the players are good at their job, so this doesn't apply to the likes of Garnacho or Vini. After Messi, those lines started disappearing. Suddenly attackers were dropping deep into midfield, wingers started drifting centrally, strikers became playmakers, midfielders became goal scorers. Now yes, these type of profiles already existed before Messi, but football became more fluid because Messi had proven that fluidity could break defensive systems apart. And again, this is where the Galileo comparisons become even stronger. Galileo's discoveries forced science itself to reorganize around a completely different understanding of reality. The old framework became impossible to defend because observations kept proving it to be incomplete. That's what Messi did to football. Once Barca and him started dominating Europe, the rest of football had no choice but to respond. Academies started prioritizing technical ability and spatial intelligence much more heavily. Smaller players who were once ignored suddenly became valuable. Coaches became obsessed with positional play, central overloads, pressing structures, and ball progression through tight spaces. The false nine role exploded across world football because teams were trying to recreate that iconic Barcelona team. Now the thing is, many teams copied the surface level ideas without fully understanding the deeper discovery underneath them. Because it's not just that Messi was playing a different position. What he was doing with the ball, he was changing football's geometry himself. After Messi, ball carrying through the center of the pitch became one of the most valuable skills in the sport because Messi proved that central control could destabilize any defensive structure. The closer the ball was to pressure, the more valuable technical precision became. That idea spread everywhere. You could see it in Pep's later Manchester City teams. You could see it in modern positional football across Europe. You could even see it in the next generation of players being developed after Messi arrived. Football started producing more technically secure midfielders, more fluid attackers, and more players comfortable operating in crowded spaces because the sport itself had learned something from Messi. Galileo Galileo did the same thing, forcing scientists to accept that the universe behaved differently than they originally believed. This is why Messi's impact feels bigger than statistics or trophies. Those numbers only measure the outcomes. They don't fully capture the discovery underneath them. What Messi really exposed were hidden possibilities inside the game itself, and you can still see the effects spreading through football today. Younger players now attempt things that once looked impossible. More players are comfortable receiving the ball in tight central areas because Messi proved those spaces could be controlled instead of feared. Sure, nobody can reach 8 Ballon d'Ors, 795 goals, 6 Golden Boots, 91 goals in a calendar year, but people at least know that it's possible. Just like Galileo, Messi forced football to confront the truth. The game people thought they understood for over a century had hidden dimensions nobody had fully recognized. That was until one small boy from Rosario started walking into crowded spaces and making the impossible look repeatable. Messi changed what football believed was possible. To see just how good Messi was in his prime, you have to watch this video right here.